The wind howled across Red Hollow, and Clara sat on the train step, her small bag hugged tight to her chest. Dust swirled around her worn boots. Men on the platform turned to stare at the new mail-order bride, whispering behind their hands. Silas Grant did not smile when he saw her. He looked her up and down like she was a horse he was buying, not a woman he was marrying. "You'll do," he grunted, and walked off without helping her with her bag. Clara's cheeks burned red with shame. Everyone was watching. Then, instead of following him quietly like a good bride should, she dropped her heavy bag right there in the dirt, picked up her skirts, and marched past him toward the water trough. She splashed cold water on her dusty face in front of the whole town. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Old women covered their mouths. Men chuckled and shook their heads. "Well, I never," one woman muttered. Silas spun around, his face red with anger. "What are you doing, girl?" Clara wiped her face with her sleeve and looked him straight in the eye. "Washing off the train dust," she said simply. "A body should look clean when she starts her new life." Someone in the crowd laughed out loud. Silas did not laugh. His jaw tightened like a trap snapping shut. That small, brave act cost her dearly. In the weeks that followed, Silas grew colder each day. He worked her hard from sunup to sundown. He gave her scraps for supper. He never once smiled at her again. Then on a night with no moon, Silas packed his saddlebags in silence. He did not wake her. He did not leave a note. By morning his horse was gone, and so was he. Clara woke alone in the creaking, empty house, with no food, no money, and no one within miles who knew her name. Black clouds rolled over Red Hollow like a herd of angry bulls. The sky turned the color of an old bruise. Jacob Steele rode fast across the plains, pushing his horse to beat the storm home. Then the rain came. It fell in cold, hard sheets, soaking through his coat in seconds. Thunder cracked so loud his horse reared back in fear. Jacob gripped the reins tight and squinted through the darkness. That's when he saw it, a tiny flicker of light glowing in the window of Silas Grant's old house. Jacob's heart skipped. Silas had ridden off days ago. Everyone in town knew that, so who was inside? He turned his horse toward the house without a second thought. Mud splashed up his boots as he swung down and ran to the door. He pounded on it hard. No answer. He pounded again. Still nothing but the sound of rain hammering the roof. Jacob pushed the door open. It creaked like an old bone. Inside, the house was dark and cold. Then in the corner by a dead fireplace he saw her. A young woman, curled up small, shaking like a leaf in the wind. Her dress hung torn and dirty. Her face was pale as chalk. Her eyes were wide and wild with fear when they landed on him. She thought he had come to hurt her. "Please," she whispered, pulling back into the shadows, "don't hurt me." Jacob froze. His chest ached like someone had punched it. Slowly, carefully, he lowered himself down to her level, the way a man does around a wounded animal. "I won't hurt you," he said softly. "Not ever. My name's Jacob. I'm here to help." For a long moment, Clara just stared at him, shaking. Then, without warning, tears spilled down her cheeks. She had not cried in weeks, not once, but something about his gentle voice broke the wall inside her. Jacob pulled off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. Then he lifted her up in his arms and carried her out into the storm, toward home. Weeks passed at Jacob's ranch. Clara's cheeks turned pink again. Her hands stopped shaking when she poured tea, but her eyes still flicked toward the door sometimes, like she was waiting for trouble to walk in. Trouble was coming, all right. It just wore a different face first, the face of the town. "That's Silas Grant's bride living in the rich man's house," a woman hissed at the market, loud enough for Clara to hear. Another woman snorted and shook her head. Men outside the saloon leaned close together, muttering and glancing over their shoulders. Clara felt the stares like tiny needles. She kept her chin up walking through town, but at night, back at the ranch, she sat by the window and hugged her knees to her chest. "They think I'm shameful," she whispered to Jacob one evening. They think wrong, Jacob said firmly. Let them talk. Talk never fed anybody. But then came a sound that made Clara's blood turn to ice, hooves pounding hard and fast up the ranch road. She knew that gallop. She'd heard it before, back when it meant trouble was coming home angry. Silas. He swung off his horse before it even stopped moving, boots hitting dirt like gunfire. His eyes were wild, his voice louder than the thunder that once brought Jacob to her door. That's my bride, he roared, storming toward the porch. She belongs to me. Clara grabbed Jacob's arm so tight her knuckles went white. Don't let him take me, she begged, her voice shaking. Jacob stepped forward, planting himself between Clara and Silas like a fence post driven deep into hard ground. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. You left her to die, Silas, Jacob said, calm and cold as winter stone. You threw away any claim you had the night you rode off. A paper don't make a marriage. Kindness does. Silas's face twisted with rage. Behind him, townsfolk had gathered, watching, waiting, silent as held breath. Silas's hand shot out fast, grabbing for Clara's wrist. She cried out and stumbled back. Jacob moved quicker. He stepped in and knocked Silas's hand away like swatting a fly off a table. Touch her again, Jacob said, his voice low and hard as iron, and you'll answer to me. Silas's fists clenched. For a moment it looked like he might swing. The crowd went dead silent, waiting for the first blow. Then a new voice cut through the tension. That's enough, Silas. The sheriff pushed through the crowd, his badge catching the last light of evening. A man who leaves his wife alone with no food and no help, the sheriff said slowly, ain't got no rights left to claim her. That's shameful, and this whole town knows it now. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Heads nodded. The same folks who had whispered cruel things about Clara now looked at Silas with cold, hard eyes instead. Silas looked around at all those faces. No one stood beside him, not one person. His shoulders sagged. Fear flickered across his face for the first time. Without another word, he climbed onto his horse and rode off down the dusty road, faster than he'd ever ridden into town. He never came back to Red Hollow again. Clara's legs gave out from relief. Jacob caught her, wrapping his arms around her shaking body. You saved me, she whispered into his shoulder, tears wetting his shirt. You saved yourself, Jacob said gently, holding her close. I just opened the door. Months rolled by. The dry season turned green again. Under a golden sunset with the whole town gathered around, Jacob and Clara stood together and made new promises to each other, this time from love, not from a stranger's letter. The same people who once whispered behind their hands now smiled and cheered. Clara, once left behind in an empty house, was never alone again. And Jacob, once a lonely rich man with an empty heart, finally had a home filled with laughter, warmth, and love that would last all his days.